Everybody, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's Scrutiny Committee. It is Monday the 6th of March, and please note that this meeting is being recorded and may be broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority as well. So I'll move straight to agenda item number 1, and that is to receive any apologies for absence. I'm just looking around. I haven't received any formal apologies for absence. I note that my vice chair hasn't quite arrived, so he may be a late arrival, okay? Agenda item number 2, declarations of interest. I'm looking around and on the screen. Are there any declarations of interest in relation to any of today's agenda? I don't believe there are any. So we'll move on to item number 3, and that is to discuss today's report 5 to 18, which is attendance in schools. I understand that our Cabinet member, Councillor Michelle Jones, will open up this report for us. And then obviously we have Gavin to my left as well as Adele to my left to discuss anything within the report, and obviously welcome Jill as well. So we've got a full team to my left, and obviously not forgetting our lovely Sue to my right as well. Okay, so Michelle, did you want to open up with this report? Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update on the work the Education Welfare Service is undertaking on attendance at primary and secondary persistent absentees and on the progress made against the targets identified in the Attendance Action Plan. Across Wales, attendance continues to be a challenge. The post-COVID period has seen our schools experience a higher number of persistent absentees due to social, emotional issues, family issues, anxiety, mental health, as well as a higher number of unauthorised absences. This is not unique to Merthyr Tydfil, but it is similar across Wales. It's also reflected in recent reporting in England too. However, through the recommendations of the attendance review, we have been able to develop an action plan to better support schools in addressing attendance, tackling persistent absentees and improve joined-up working with partners across the local authority. Attendance will always remain a priority. There has been a significant amount of work undertaken to support the work. However, we do recognise that there is still much work to do to bring about continued improvement. So, in summary of the report at 1.1, the report provides members with an update on the attendance at primary and secondary and on the progress made against the targets identified in the Attendance Action Plan. At 1.2, the report specifically addresses attendance data, persistent absentees and progress against the Attendance Action Plan. So the recommendations at 2.1 is that the content of the report is discussed and noted. And at 2.2, that members consider if there are any other aspects of the attendance that they wish to scrutinise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, colleagues, excuse me, I'm going to go straight into questioning. Are there any questions in relation to this report? Councillor Anna Williams-Price, first of all, please.
Thank you. First of all, I note from 3.2, you've outlined the link between good attendance and learning. Can I ask, to what extent do you think parents understand this message, and how is this message being presented as part of the local authority communication plan?
I think to be fair, it's a mix. Parents, we've worked hard even prior to the start of this academic year to really push home and drive home on social media the link, the significant impact that even a loss of a day can have over time. It is a message that bears frequent repeating, and it is one that you know it's in the action plan as well, how we use media and our communication channels to continue to drive home that message that actually fundamental to learning is being in school and attending. Clearly there's a function for schools as well, and you know we encourage our schools to be really clear in their correspondence and in their social media with parents as well in terms of driving that message home. There are some consistent elements that over the years have been used, and we reviewed those in the summer in terms of the messaging and how we kind of communicate in maybe a less regimented, slightly trying to vary the style a little bit. I think over the years, parents have been used to a sort of a red, amber, yellow, red, amber, green, or the other way around, green at the top, amber, red, and the implications of missing out on this part of it. What we tried to do over the summer is to come up with a social media campaign, really, and messaging that really just focused on the impact of a day or 2 days or 3 days in a term, rather than kind of because there's an element where a parent might go, do you know what, there is going to be an impact, but we need a holiday, and so we're willing to kind of move into the amber for our holiday. Or what we want to say is actually, we don't want to think like that. We want to think that actually any day missed is significant. So some of the messaging was around the importance of a day in terms of our social media coverage. Blunt answer to your question is it's a mixed understanding that we're working hard to just try and communicate out via schools and through our own mechanisms to more broadly make that message aware. Could you remind me what the second part of the question was again?
So it was how it was being presented as the local part of the local authorities' comms strategy, which I think you've answered. But could I ask a follow-up then?
Yeah.
If you've obviously changed the messaging from last summer onwards, what assessment have you got so far about whether that is working?
Oh, this is still on. Apologies for that. I think it'd probably be more accurate to say we've supplemented the message. So if you look on the council website, we've still got some of that messaging. What we did with social media is mix it up a little bit. So we had some basic animations that were on Facebook and other social media that were a little bit more punchy, because a lot of the messaging historically that we've had around those areas has been quite wordy. In terms of engagement, we did a little bit of research with corporate comms around the engagement on those pages of the website in terms of attendance. The number of parents that were actually accessing those pages was very, very low. And so as much as we could say, oh, there's a big drive around the website and the information around attendance on there, if not many people are actually looking at it, and if maybe those that are looking at it are parents that are looking to move a child or move into the authority rather than actually within the borough, then is it the most effective approach? So we've still got those. The schools, if you look at school websites, there's elements on their attendance pages and in their policies that reference that, but we've tried to supplement that with some shorter, punchier messages that hopefully would hit home too.
Thank you. And related to that, how much do you think understanding of the message of the importance of attendance is related to own parental educational attainment? And is there a role for the adult learning section of the local authority to supplement that message?
Definitely, and yes. And I think that's something that we're keen to explore. Actually, I think that's a good action for us to factor in. I know that obviously when it comes to engaging with parents, our schools are much more involved in that side of it, but they are conscious that there are, that there are some families that are more responsive and reactive to that kind of messaging and to engaging in the education of their children altogether. But if there are avenues that we can take with other agencies' services, then absolutely we'll factor that in. It's referenced in the action plan somewhat, but I think it's an area that we could flesh out in more detail for sure.
Thank you, Gav. And I'm just going to bring Sue in at that point as well, if that's okay.
It is something that's looked at when we're putting family learning packages in place into schools. At the moment, there's an issue with engaging family learning tutors anyway, because of the various aspects that we've gone through. But it is something that we work on in those family learning sessions, is actually engaging with those parents to actually say, look, there's attendance is a key part of attainment and how you actually drive that forward. So that's factored into the work that the family learning team do as part of the adult learning stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Lawrence next. then Jeff, and then we have Jamie on screen. Lawrence?
Yes, I got a couple of questions. First one was, I noticed a reference to an EWS drafted education neglect policy. Could you give us a background to that and what that entails?
Where's that reference? Sorry, Councillor.
I could see it's in one of the documents. Report, but certainly.
It's fine. I can address that.
Yep.
We are working closely with Children's Services on a number of policies. One would be more broadly called education neglect policy, and that is looking at how we would then work with Children's Services around those pupils that have been persistently absent for a period of time.
Yeah.
So that's almost a specific piece of work, so that we look at the data, we consider those pupils that, and we're still working out the detail on some of that, is do they have to have been persistently absent for a year, 12 months, or what is the period where we would then engage with Children's Services around that pupil and that family to unpick some of those details. 12 months is a very long time in a child's education and in the life of a family. So our thinking is that could be shorter, but we've got to work out those details. We've got quite a few pupils that are between sort of 70 and 80, but equally we have a number of pupils that are between 60 and 70 and so on down. And so we need to be really careful about and focused in how we work with Children's Services around those families, to make the best use of officer time and best impact with that family and that child in terms of their education and attendance. The other policy, the education, the neglect policy, is something that's ongoing in terms of discussions with Children's Services. There's further work required on that. That's more of a strategic engagement that is more detailed in terms of it not just being a threshold is hit and therefore we then engage. It's more about how collectively education with Children's Services work together to support and work with those families. It's a little bit more. I think we'll have to change the name of one of them so there's not a confusion between the two. But clearly, whether it's ALN or whether it's attendance, we're seeing a huge overlap now in terms of pupils and families, where in order to address one element, whether it's attendance or whether it's an additional learning need or complexity, education just doing it by ourselves or trying by ourselves is not going to work. And Children's Services just doing it by themselves is not going to work. We have to work closer together. So there is work ongoing. Myself and Taryn are discussing how we can do that. I don't know whether Sue, because some of this is historic as well, isn't it, Sue?
Yes, Lawrence, it's the number of head teachers have asked for a neglect toolkit. It's something that Children's Services have, but actually it wouldn't be suitable for schools to deliver. So it's a piece of work that is ongoing with Children's Services to actually have a look at how this can be delivered together. The Children's Services have sent out, or we've sent out a joint forms to Microsoft Forms to schools this week, today. Or it was last week, but schools couldn't access it. But so they've had the access today to actually see how Children's Services and education can work closer together to address the needs of the children. So we will be analysing the results of that and taking that back to head teachers and governors in the summer term.
So is it an aim when this will be completed?
The piece of work with Children's Services will be worked through with head teachers through the summer term.
Right. Okay, thanks. Okay. The reference in the plan regarding the Family Liaison Officers Network. I just wonder what the membership of that network looks like. Could you elaborate, please?
Yes, so we've got are in a part of the membership of the Family Liaison Officers Network Group. There's, I believe, around 15 family liaison officers that the schools have employed who are fully employed as family liaison officers, but we've also got other schools that that do clerk duties, and then the family liaison officers role is sort of added on, you know, to their role. So they sort of clerk and attendant. So most of the schools do actually participate in that group. It's run half-termly. And we've got a very good sort of agenda where persistent absentees are discussed. Good practice is discussed. We've had other agencies that have come on board as well and done presentations with regards to how they support attendance, the early help hub. We've had CAMS come in as well and talk about how health can sort of support attendance as well. So during that group as well, if there's any sort of issues regarding any particular cases that they want to discuss, they will sort of ask us. So good practice is shared, you know, very well during that group. And they've also set up a WhatsApp group as well now. So they are part of that as well. So that's almost, you know, most of the schools are engaging in that.
Thank you. In the action plan, there's a section that says ensure targets for attendance. And one bullet point was, it's informed by an understanding of individual pupils. I just wondered exactly what that was trying to say.
Yeah, that was one of the recommendations and sub bullet points of the actual attendance report. Was that there needed to be a drilling down to individual pupil level data, both from the local authority and more importantly at a school level. That schools had the data available where they could look at that individual pupil level data and look at the themes. You would assume, you know, that somewhat schools would automatically be doing that, but they wouldn't necessarily always have the data set out and the comparison data set out that we would be able to provide. So what we've done with the data team is we've been working to pull together data sets that would enable schools to drill down to individual pupil level, but within the context of class level, year group level, boys, girls, different needs and backgrounds, so that actually a contextual approach can be applied to challenging and addressing attendance. Again, it comes back to that point that if there are multi-agency services involved with a pupil, but you specifically as a school might just try and address attendance with the parents, that actually you need to work as a team around a pupil with other agencies, with other services, to address that attendance. So it's basically giving schools and ourselves the data where we can collectively look at it and you know, we can show individual pupil success at that level.
There you go. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. We'll go to Jeff next, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's obvious from the report that Merthyr Tydfil's attendance is a little worse than the Welsh average. It's in the bottom quarter, and I don't think that's unfair to say, and I don't think it's anywhere it's not been before. But we've been here for a long time now, guys. You know, and I know everybody wants to see children attend more because attendance means attainment. I get that, but we don't seem to be getting very far very fast. And I don't mean that disparagingly against anybody, but the truth of the matter is that we don't seem to be making big headroads gains into the target. So what are the best practices of the other local authorities who are in the top quartile, and why are they different from ours, please?
Did you want to answer that? Okay. I think it's a fair comment. I think contextually, it's not something that is, as it says in the report, there are reasons for some of that at the moment. And I think it's not just reflected across local authorities in terms of statutory education. Early years attendance is a real battle at the minute. Youth service, speaking to youth service, you know, team, they're having a real struggle with engagement with pupils. So I'm not looking to make excuses. Our attendance needs to improve, but I would balance that with you know, the schools are working incredibly hard to get pupils into school and attending. Is it making as much impact as we want it to have? No. Are we seeking to put in place, you know, as much as we possibly can to address that? Yes, we are. I think if you look at the attendance grant that we had, we've seen real success in pockets where that, we've used those grants, that grant in particular ways, and Welsh Government fortunately have just come on board. I think it's that there's going to be an additional grant coming through. We basically met with Welsh Government as 22 local authorities as a sort of a task force, really, because we've been saying to Welsh Government, this is a problem everywhere. And it was really interesting in that meeting that the depth of difficulty that local authorities are facing. Those that are in the so basically the meeting broke the 22 local authorities into 4 groups, and it was a mix of demographic. So within ours we had Monmouthshire, and we had we had Caerphilly. There were a number of other groups, and what was interesting was when we all talked about what we were doing, when we all talked about the different things that were going on, there wasn't a great deal of variation. Monmouthshire and those that are in the top quartile didn't have a secret remedy that they were using that gave them an advantage. Everybody's using the attendance grant as flexibly as they can. Everybody is appointing additional staff to try and address low attendance. Everybody is seeking to work with children's services and other agencies to address attendance. Everybody is seeking to use data in a smarter way to target attendance. Those schools in those local authorities in the top quartile were in the top quartile before COVID as well, and benefited maybe from a different demographic than some other local authorities. I think it's fair to say there are no easy solutions. I would love to be able to say to you, we've got this nailed and give us a couple of years and we'll be right up there. This is a battle for everyone, and as much as I hope the schools in Monmouthshire are doing great. This has been recorded, but our focus is very much particularly Merthyr schools, Merthyr pupils, Merthyr families, and we're seeking, and again, this is where scrutiny is so valuable and important, we're seeking to do everything we can to work with schools and other agencies to see that improvement. Adele, do you want to come in?
Yeah, you've mentioned it, Gavin. I am part of the All Wales Managers Network group that I attend. They run sort of every month. We are all saying the same thing. We are all experiencing the same sort of thing across all the local authorities. There is very high authorised absence now, very much so since COVID. We're experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of pupils that have mental health. Obviously, we've got our sort of deprived areas, just as some of the local authorities are. And we're all experiencing, the same thing. We're all trying to share. We are sharing good practice. We all are trying to sort of challenge more to schools. But I think what we have found as well, especially after COVID, is parents' attitudes towards education has changed as well. So we are seeing, families that are sort of saying, well, they're not seeing education as important now. So it isn't that sort of push for them to push their child back into school. So we are experiencing some longer term absences now. But it's not, as you said, just to Merthyr, it is across all authorities.
And I think the challenges have changed as well. So I think, if you look at the gap between where we were post-COVID and the gap where we are now and where we are now, that group of pupils is not made up of pupils that have just, the families have decided to take more holidays, or they're tricky issues around anxiety, and so that gap of challenge is a lot trickier to unpick than that traditional persistent abs or just unauthorized absence where parents are, or schools might be a little bit lax in terms of their challenge around illness and those kind of things. It's much more difficult to address the needs of those pupils and those families in that gap between where we were previously and where we are now.
Take that taken on board, and thank you very much for that answer. I can see where you're coming from. If it was that simple, the skill set sitting up there would have had it finished long ago, but it is obviously not simple. I get that. How many schools, please, have an SLA with EWS, and what's the difference in attendance for those with the SLA and those without the SLA?
So we've got 19 schools that are currently bought into our service level agreement. So obviously they benefit, you know, from the additional education inclusion officer that'll go to the schools weekly, and support them in challenging the attendance, as well as, you know, obviously the more sort of statutory functions with regards to maybe, you know, guiding them towards fines and things like that. There isn't a lot of difference between the schools' attendance that are brought into the service and the ones that haven't brought into the service. It is fluctuating. We had an attendance sort of review, which sort of you know, pointed that out when we had that. But I think every school is individual and their needs are individual as well. We've got some schools that are in our service that will want our inclusion officers to, you know, go around the classes, do some sort of assemblies and that sort of work, where we have others then that are a lot more challenging and need that extra support, and will use our service to sort of basically do all home visits and look at the sort of prosecution process. So all schools are different and all schools' needs are different, whether they're in the SLA or out of the SLA. So some schools that are not brought into the SLA will have their flow or have their clerk that will sort of do first day response and do sort of assemblies and promote the attendance. And other schools will sort of use, you know, a family liaison officer to go and do a home visit. So, and I said the attendance is fluctuating, is, you know, there isn't any sort of comparison really.
So given that, thank you very much. If you had a pot of money, would that pot of money, be it sufficient, sort the problem out?
How big a pot of money? No,
Lisa's
the answer.
airline fee.
No, I mean, the reality is that a pot of money will go so far to address certain things. So a very real example, we've funded, I always smile a little bit when I say it, we've funded vending machines for a number of schools from the attendance grant, which have been incredibly successful at primary in encouraging attendance. Where it's been incredibly successful has been re-engaging with pupils that maybe had 85% and getting them back up to 88, 89, or if they're at 90 to 92. Those kind of methods do not necessarily work when it comes to persistent abs, and they certainly don't work to you know, inspire a pupil that's on 45% or 0% attendance. So there's real benefit there, and this was the message we gave to Welsh Government, that you know, what we've been able to do is address certain elements of attendance, but money will not solve some elements. Yeah, if you could employ a multi-agency team that included, you know, the whole range of professional input, including health, then we might tackle some of those issues. But it isn't a case of, if we pumped X amount of money into education or to the schools, that we could improve the picture more, but we won't be able to solve the problem.
Thank you. And you said to improve the picture more, but you wouldn't be able to solve the problem. I get that. To what extent would you be below 100%? I'm not looking for a figure, but would it be significantly, or would it be a lot closer to where we are? What would that do?
It would be closer. I think that the phrase that we've tried to use is with schools is that targets need to be aspirational but realistic. So there's you know, there's very little point in giving the schools a target of you know, the average of some, you know, the best performing local authority in Wales. There's no point in giving targets that don't actually have value in themselves. So in terms of setting targets, and we went through a really detailed process of target setting this year. We spent quite an amount of time looking at trends and our own data and taking COVID into account. We then had discussions and dialogue with all the schools around those targets. We adjusted some because we wanted the schools to have targets that were realistic for them to drive progress. Every local authority is behind where they were pre-COVID, and our aspiration realistically is the Welsh average at this point, as is set out in the report, and we've got a way to go to that, and then obviously there's a way to go from the Welsh average to 100%.
Fine, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, I'm going to Jamie, Councillor Scriven online.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just two questions. I think my one question was just answered from Jeff's, but in terms of the absentee data we've got, do we know if there's a particular age group that's more adversely affected by these problems? And the reason I ask is because in my line of work, I go through a lot of data like this, looking at things, and what we're noting at the moment across the UK and certain areas of Wales is particularly year 8 age group that are suffering the most in terms of attendance records. So I'm just wondering, is that data trending in our area as well?
So when we were looking, when we were doing this report, we were looking, we are able to, go drill down into year groups and classes. And what we found was, well, historically, really, it is sort of year 10 and year 11 that are always sort of see that dip in attendance, and year 6 as well. But we've found sort of year 1 and 2 as well this year. But historically, it is sort of, the older year groups, year 10, year 11, and sometimes year 9. But with regards to sort of year 10 and 11, we get in a lot of the entrenched cases. So obviously, we get a lot of truancy, and different sort of reasons as to why they're not attending rather than parentally condoned.
Right. I just ask that's quite interesting, because in comparison to other authorities, then we've got a bit of an anomaly. There's something irregular happening on our end that's not in other areas. So personally, from my perspective, Chair, that would be something that, in my opinion, under 2.2, perhaps we can take further look at and scrutiny of, because it's trying to understand why are we an outlier in terms of what other authorities are struggling with attendance. What was my experience anyway, we're working with UNICEF and working as a participation officer with other authorities, is that it's year 10 and year 11, the ones that we don't normally have to worry about. There's less pressure, less stress in terms of absenteeism, but mental health is the highest issue, not the absentee record. So thank you for that. My second question, as I just linked on to well-being again.
Jamie, sorry, just to make a note, I've noted that and we can discuss that as part of the forward work plan. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's good. Thanks, Chair. So going on to well-being anyway, I'm going through the report, and I apologise if I've missed it, because the only thing I really picked up on was the area around, I think it was the FLO being FIO or FLO being in place, looking at anxiety and reintegrating pupils to school. But I'm quite interested to know more about our well-being approach and the impact it's having on students in terms of their attendance record. Because again, that's another international indicator as one of the primary triggers and reasons behind absenteeism and issues with school and mental health for young people is all based around education. So I think what I'd really like to know a bit more about and see more of in that action plan is what's the well-being approach for students, what are the offers on the table, and how are we approaching well-being in terms of attendance? So I don't know if there's a bit more information you could share with us now around that.
I'm not sure if Gavin wants to come in, but I think what we've got, and it may be something that you want to take forward, is where we're looking at that whole school approach, Councillor Scrivens, and actually look at what the department, what the local authority is doing against that, because that is multi-agency, and how we're linking in with the different areas. So it isn't just an education focus. It would be social services, it would be community groups as well. So that may, whilst I wouldn't want to go into sort of any detail here because it isn't specific, there aren't specific possibly actions that we're doing with our attendance officers, but it's certainly part of that whole school approach agenda. So it may be something, Chair, that you want us to consider moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. And noted. I think, Jamie, again, that's something we'll consider and take forward then, perhaps as an action. Okay, so we'll pick it up when we go through the later agenda item, which is the forward work plan.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Chair. And that's exactly what I couldn't think of at the time, Sue, but that's what I was thinking when I was going through the report, is how did this action plan fit into that whole school approach? When it's such an essential factor that could affect attendance, we're in a position where we really want to get better. It's got to be an integral part of that plan. And I'd be specifically interested to look at the bespoke support as well that we'll have for ALN young people, disabled young people, those who are in care with caring responsibilities. As again, they are the ones at the bottom end of the rung every time, every authority for being the most affected by those issues. So I'd like to see a bit more on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Sorry, Sue, did you want to come back? You're all right. Okay. Thanks, Jamie. Noted, and we'll discuss at a later point this afternoon. Thank you. I have Councillor Anna Williams-Price next. Councillor Claire Jones has indicated to speak, and then I think Councillor Clive Tubby after that. Elizabeth, I think after that then as well. Okay, so Anna, over to you first.
Thank you. Looking at 4.1, which gives the figures from 2018 up to 21-22. 20 to 21 to 21 to 22, those figures have worsened both secondary and primary schools, whereas I think perhaps the anticipation would be as we kind of come out of COVID restrictions, they would naturally improve. So can I ask what you believe are the main drivers of those worsening figures across that time period?
Yeah, so the schools fully reopened in April 2021. And what we found then during the sort of autumn term was that we had very high authorised absences, which were recorded, whereas before they would be recorded as sort of isolation or COVID. We were still getting a lot of those reasons, but we recorded as illness. So we still had a lot of pupils, a lot of families were very sort of had quite a bit of anxiety in returning their child then back in that September. There was a lot of schools as well then where obviously, you know, we were adjusting back into coming back full time. And then if a child presented then with, you know, a cough and similar symptoms where it could be a cold, there was that sort of anticipation where, you know, they would ring the parent as well, you know, so that child would be home and you know, they would expect it to take a test. So there was still a lot of all that sort of COVID anxiety around. So in that autumn term, we did have sort of high absences with regards to what we would be coded as illness, but a lot of it would be around those sort of, you know, reasons.
Thank you. Because I noted 5.2.2, there's reference to COVID conditions continue to impact on attendance. So, and I was going to ask for how you are defining COVID conditions in the context of this report. So is that what you mean by COVID conditions? And how much does that impact now when hopefully some of those anxieties, particularly on behalf of the schools, if not the parents, would hopefully be resolved?
Well, what we're finding now is we are seeing an increase in illness, you know, medical absences. Parents are struggling, you know, with sending their child to school. We are still seeing parents being anxious, children's being anxious, and that's being with regards to mixing again, high anxiety, high sort of mental health, struggling with the work because they have had a long sort of period off. So yeah, you know, we are finding that we're still getting those sort of reasons. Also, we're getting high holiday absences. Some families are still saying that holidays have been sort of cancelled during COVID, and you know, and then they've, even though we're sort of 2 years down the line now, they still sort of taken, you know, they've been rebooked, and so they've sort of taken those holidays, and we're finding attitudes change as well. So we are, you know, we are finding that we get in some schools a lot of lateness issues, and you know, when that's being challenged, families are saying, oh well, you know, the attitude is, you know, it's not that important, you know, and so yeah, we are sort of still getting those sort of reasons. So that is sort of, you know, impacting really largely on the attendance.
Thank you. So in terms of the evidence you have, is it fair to say that mental health is currently a contributing factor to poor attendance?
Yes.
Thank you. And I understand that with waiting lists for mental health services within the NHS seeing increased demand and long waiting lists as a result, some schools have been providing counselling that's accessible for free for pupils as part of the school day. So can I ask what assessment has been made on the impact of these programmes and what consideration has been given to ensuring that all school pupils across the borough can access a counselling service without requirement for an NHS referral?
Well, schools use the early help up referral. So if we're working on a case, if our inclusion officers are working on a case and the families trying to support the family, and when they are saying anxiety and mental health, we will sort of on their consent refer to the early help hub. So there's health agencies sort of sits on that. And then a referral will go through to CAMSEN and they can make that sort of assessment. I'm not sort of sure with regards to school counselling or how that affects.
I'm not sure if Gavin, we have a contract with a counselling service, and as part of the whole school approach, we've had some additional money, so there is more support for primary schools as well. Schools can actually make the referrals through to that counselling service, and actually have that support prior to actually going into the CAM service. So there's that sort of preventative work before it's escalated to CAMS. There's also part of the whole school approach. There's some work being undertaken by public health called SHINE, which is again sort of some support for children and young people in schools. It's being rolled out at the moment. It's only in its second year, so that's being rolled out as part of the whole school approach. And we've also got schools in the Southern Valley, I believe. Lawrence will know this, who've actually engaged a company called Place to Be to support not only the children but the staff. We have tried to engage that company in other schools in the county borough. However, they've struggled to find staffing. So it is using the counselling service that we've got, which is a joint. We've procured it jointly with Children's Services, but we've utilised our whole school approach money to be able to roll that out to more children to support them.
Thank you. That was specifically what I had in mind as being more familiar with the Southern Cluster, and I was conscious that it was not currently available across the borough.
They've got that in additionality to the other service.
Thank you.
Okay, Anna, any further questions from you?
Just one, if that's okay. Can I ask with regards to fixed penalty notices, obviously it states in the action plan that Cyfarthfa Cluster has adopted the recommended approach, and can you advise if there is any evidence in improved attendance within this cluster as a result?
It's a fluctuating picture. Schools that do utilise the fixed penalty notices, we do get some successes with regards to the pupils returning to school. But in other cases, then, they are more entrenched, and we are finding that after utilising the fixed penalty notices, that we are having to go further down a sort of prosecution route the second time. So it is a fluctuating picture. What I can say is with regards to the Cyfarthfa Cluster, they've adopted the approach which was to start in October. Only 3 of those schools at the moment are utilising the fixed penalty notice, so it is a little bit too early to sort of analyse that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, colleagues, excuse me. Councillor Claire Jones has indicated she wishes to speak, and also our co-opted member, Elizabeth. After Liz, I'm going to then draw to conclusion this report, okay? Because I think we've asked some really in-depth questioning. So, Claire, over to you first.
Thank you, Chair. I was going on to the residential setting. So, how are you actually trying to tackle absenteeism with Clark children? Because it is quite an issue. They don't attend school because you've got some then, and how are you tackling the fixed penalty notices with some being on a section 76 and some being on a section 31 with a joint parental? So I'm quite interested in that one, if you don't mind, please.
Sorry, Claire, was that Clark children looked after? Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I couldn't quite hear. It's fine.
Obviously, we have an education CLAR coordinator in Jess Jones. It would be the first port of call for her to report attendance. Are these pupils with ALN that are placed as well because they're CLAR, but they're placed jointly, or pupils that are placed solely by Children's Services?
Children's Services.
Okay, so primarily then it would be a function of the education clerk coordinator to monitor attendance. Our expectation would be that she does. It's not even an expectation. She works very, very closely with the education team, the ALN team, and reports any concerns in. Obviously, we have a concern if a residential pupil is not accessing the education they're entitled to. Sometimes it's on site, and that makes it a whole lot easier. If it's off site, then more often than not we'll be aware of that pupil in terms of the education setting that they're attending. We may even contribute to the placement costs, but we would certainly, there'd be an expectation that where attendance was an issue or a concern, that there would be representation at a CLAR review of some description, or if they were known because of additional learning needs as well, and there was a statement review or an IDP review, then we would certainly make sure that there was representation from education at those meetings too. But it's very much a joined up approach, with Jess leading on it largely, because obviously that's her day-to-day role, working with those settings.
Okay, thank you. Following on from Jamie's question on 5.6.1, with a reduced timetable, how flexible are you? Because a lot of children who've got anxiety, when they're told that they've got to, say they're told they've got to go to school at 8:30, I mean, their anxiety level is going to go through the roof, you know, throughout the night, you know. So how flexible are you with a reduced timetable? Are you having the child go in first thing in the morning into the end of the reduced timetable? Or if you can see the child is really anxious about going in first thing in the morning, are you flexible in them coming a bit later and joining on at a later time?
Yeah, it's entirely bespoke. The pupils that are on a reduced timetable, if your expectation and hope and goal is that within 4, 6, or however many weeks that they would be engaged back in education, the very fact that they're needing to go onto a reduced timetable would underline the need for a bespoke approach. So we would look at where they lessons that they enjoy, where they experience success. We would look at the number of hours or the timings of that. Do they get tired toward the end of the day, and therefore that would lean towards an earlier start? Are they not very good first thing in the morning, which might mean a late morning start or an afternoon start? It literally is on an individual basis. Obviously, there are constraints from the school side, and sometimes that can't be accommodated in its entirety. But our expectation would be, with a reduced timetable, that there would be a pastoral support plan in place, and actually that there would be an awareness of, if the end goal is to get back into school, then your starting point is going you will start with the most success that you can for that pupil.
Yeah, thank you. Going on to the attendance project in Avontaff High School, what is the have you got, since the report, is there any update on that? Because when I read that, I was quite interested. In that. So how do you feel that is going?
Yeah, it was something that we were able to support through the attendance grant initially. It was a really interesting piece of work that we didn't have, that we would have liked to have carried on, and certainly with the Welsh Government grant hopefully coming back into play, is something that we would look to support again with that school, but with also other schools if they would be interested. It did show some real short-term success. It was a bespoke piece of work with targeting individual pupils, with LSAs working with them. Again, it was more focused on those where pupils could be encouraged quite quickly back into school. So again, it's that targeted approach. Will it work with someone on 60% attendance? Not very likely. But will it work with someone who's on 75 or 80 or 85? Then it might. That contact from an LSA, that phone call, the door stopping, very good value for money in terms of the cost of the LSAs to do that piece of work. It worked or failed based on the correct identification of the pupils that were part of that group. And I wouldn't say that it failed in any way, because the school worked really hard to identify who best to target it with. But it was a very short-term piece of work. It was in the summer term, which is never the most ideal term to do that kind of piece of work. But we're very keen to do it again and to do a fuller piece of work around it. The head teacher, it was something that was in place in his previous school, and so it was an idea that came from the school that we were then able to support with some additional funding.
Yeah, Chair, I for one would welcome that, progressing again, because that to me, when I read that was really interesting. I've got one final question, please. As much as I agree with the reward, and I do agree with, my concern is that there are children, we've discussed this as well, there are children that are being neglected and they're not going to school, it's no fault of their own. It's not nice watching a child not having, and it's not their fault, so I do worry about that, because I do feel that there are certain children who are not present and it's not their fault. It is because they are being neglected or for whatever reason, and I hate the fact that they've been left out, and I'd like to think, that there are some cases where children, it's picked up that there's an issue with them attending due to parental neglect, that at some point they are still getting some form of reward, because they do need that to be able to thrive, and at some point they are going to be able to leave the house by themselves to attend school. And I just feel that I'd like other children looked after as well.
It's a different approach. If you were to look at the breakdown of our attendance grant spend, really the majority of it probably has been spent toward that end.
Okay.
So for example, we've funded an additional education welfare officer with a youth service background to work with the PRU, to particularly build relationship with pupils there and encourage that work. We've also funded additional capacity, actually a whole member of staff, to work with pupils that are on tuition and reduced timetables. We know that you're absolutely right that the whole tension around rewards and that kind of thing is felt. For some pupils that is absolutely appropriate and will work. For others, you actually need a dedicated body on the ground that can go out, that can build that relationship, that can work with the family, that can liaise with other services, and fight for that pupil where it's necessary, fight with that family when it's necessary, and do that work. So we're endeavouring to do both.
That's really appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Claire. Okay, and we'll go to Liz next.
I just wanted to, it's really been picked up on. I was just looking at the mental health aspect and going to ask about that, but we'll be putting that in the forward plan anyway, won't we? So I've got no other questions.
No problem. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that, and I think that is a whole wider issue, but inevitably on a whole school approach as well is so imperative and important, isn't it? Okay, colleagues, thank you for that, and I think just picking up on some really key pertinent points there, especially around that joint work with colleagues in social services as well, and the early help hub and the counselling services. It is about bringing that additionality now, isn't it, to the schools and to sharing between the different departments as well, because post pandemic, I shouldn't say post COVID because it's still around inevitably, but post pandemic certainly there are those young people who haven't actually re-engaged, and if they have engaged, it is sort of so ad hoc that there are perhaps some other concerning issues around them and the support that they and their family needs as well. So that's really important to note, as well as other aspects in the report that the team are endeavouring to address with the schools. So thank you both for that. Colleagues, we'll pick up on some of those items as we discuss areas later in the agenda. We'll move on to agenda item number 4 now, which is the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal Wales Act. Michelle, our Cabinet Member, is going to introduce this report again, and with us then we've got Gavin again, and of course we've got Jill as well. So Michelle, over to you, dear.
Thank you, Chair. We are all aware that Welsh Government passed new legislation in 2018, which is known as the Additional Learning Needs Educational Tribunal in Wales. From the 1st of September 2021, the Act started to change the way that learners with additional learning needs are supported in education in Wales. I can sum up the changes as follows. So bringing together all existing systems into a new single system for ALN. A statement of special educational needs is replaced with an individual development plan, which sets out what support will be given to help our learners learn. These are now all legal documents and should be available to learners with all levels of additional learning needs. Being more learner focused and adopting a person-centred approach, we know that Merthyr has been ahead of the game in this area. Improving transition between settings, provide Welsh language provision where needed, and being a fair and transparent system for all. So this report outlines our approaches in Merthyr Tydfil to implementing ALN reform. It shows how the key requirements of the ALN Act are being met by both our schools and by the local authority. So just quickly to summarise the report, the purpose of this report is to gain assurance the key requirements of the ALN Act are being met and to explore resources are being used within the service to ensure there is sufficient capacity to comply with the new duties set out in the Act. So the recommendations to 2.1 is the report is discussed and noted, and at 2.2, members consider if there are any other aspects that they would wish to be scrutinised. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And colleagues, I'm just mindful that Lawrence led an ALN task and finish group as well. So inevitably there may be aspects, outcomes, recommendations, etc., from that task and finish group that would, work hand in hand with this particular report as well. And I know Lawrence is next on the agenda, so just mindful of that. Okay. Are there any questions in relation to this report? Claire?
I got one question, and it's around the Welsh language. So if a child, an ANL child, is removed from mainstream school and placed in to an additional learning, are they able to maintain the Welsh language? Is it dual language there? So if they went to T-Dysgu, so are they able to communicate and carry on their lessons in the Welsh medium? Yeah. Thank you.
It's interesting because I chair the it's priority 6 of the WESP, which is around ALN, and we're undertaking a piece of work with T-Dysgu, but also Greenfield, about the level of Welsh language within those two provisions schools. There's another priority there, ambition around establishing a Welsh medium LRB as well, and that's scheduled for, I think, currently September 24. We've done a significant amount of data work around what the need is for pupils in terms of when we were looking to establish the LRB. What is the evidence telling us the need is? What is the size of the need? What is the specifics? Is it ASD? Is it complex? Where is the need? So that work is ongoing, and is very much definitely part of the WESP. Specifically in terms of, we've got some good Welsh, good levels of Welsh in T-Dysgu, but currently the method of communication is English.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Jamie Scriven next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just one question from me, and obviously under aim 4 of the Act, it talks about engagement opportunities for children and young people. So I just wanted to ask, are we utilising the children's rights approach ALN framework? Now, I know Merthyr was part of the pilot that put this together, and it launched in July 20th of last year. And personally, to me, it's a very important toolkit that we should be utilising in the work around the Act, because we want to make sure the young people that we're actually talking about under the Act are involved in developing the services that are going to support them.
Sorry, yes, that was that was something that I was involved in. I came in partway through. I think Sarah Bowen led on it initially. Is that right? It was that one, yeah. And then I was involved toward the end. That is something that we're cognizant of, and it's something that a number of our schools were involved in. The work is ongoing. I think from speaking, I spoke to David Egan about it a couple of weeks ago, actually, to chase up what was happening. So I would be, yeah, I mean, I'll take it as an action from here to pick that up in more detail, I think, with the ALN team and with colleagues in schools.
Yeah, and that would be great. And I think from our perspective as a scrutiny as well, I think it'd be interesting because this is quite a recent toolkit that's been developed. And only last year, as I said, it's come into play, to see what's the pros and cons of integrating that into the work. Is it useful? Is it working? You know, especially around the 3 different areas that it's looking at. So I think any update that we can have on that and how it's actually working would be really appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scriven. I've got Councillor Anna Williams-Price next.
Thank you. When this item was put for the Education Committee at Senate level, they identified that there was potentially numbers of children who would previously have qualified for School Action Plus or a statement under the SENS system who no longer qualify for an IDP under the ALMN system. So are you also noticing that trend within Merthyr Tydfil? And are those numbers being tracked of pupils who would previously qualify for support under the old system but no longer do under the new system?
There we are. I think I'm on now. Good afternoon, everyone. What we've asked schools to do is to look very carefully at their SEN registers. And there's no doubt there was far too many children who were on the SEN register at School Action, who were having universal provision within the schools, catch-up reading. We wouldn't class those as needing an IDP. That is the universal provision within the school. We wouldn't say those children had additional learning needs. So what we're looking at is the School Action Plus and the statement in children. So they will move to the new ALN register. So we are seeing a narrowing, if you like, but we're getting the children who have ALN on the ALN register. There are a lot of children who have additional interventions in school, but do not have additional learning needs. So, for example, catch-up maths, ELSA, all sorts of interventions that schools put in as part of their universal provision. And it's getting schools to understand what is their universal provision. And there's an awful lot of work going on now with Elenco's looking at what they provide in schools. What is their universal provision? And how would we define a child as having additional learning needs? And we go by the code. A child who has additional learning needs has a need that is in addition to, needs something that is in addition to and different from what other children have, which is the ALP.
Thank you. So on that basis then, is it your understanding that children who were previously on School Action Plus, which I believe necessitated a diagnosis of additional learning need, should not have been removed?
No.
Okay.
They would have IDPs. They would move to the IDP system under the mandated year groups because we're in a period of implementation. So we have mandated year groups that are moving on to the new system. And that applies for statements as well.
Okay. So that's not consistent with my experience and information I've received from residents. So I think perhaps that's something to be followed up outside of this committee, because my concern was there's a risk the work implemented under the SEN system is undone if children do not continue with an IDP. So I think there's concern both from parents and also potentially from schools about those who've been removed from those systems not being monitored in future.
I think schools will always monitor their children in the sense of many schools have something that they call differentiation plus. So they will have their differentiation, all the levels of differentiation within the classroom. Then they will have a group of children who they would assess as in their school as being that little bit extra. Then they will have their pupils who have their IDPs, who need something in addition to and different from.
Thank you. And separately to that, can I ask, do you believe there's appropriate knowledge and scrutiny at school governor level on this matter? And if not, how could this be improved?
I think that's a work in progress. I think Elencos are highly skilled at the moment, and you probably know from all of you who are school governors that your Elencos are really very, very skilled in the ALN process. They've got sound understanding. They've had an awful lot of training over the last 3 years, and we are now in year 2 of implementation. So a lot of Elencos now in Merthyr have worked with their governing bodies. They've done training. You've probably had training on IDPs, training on the whole ALN reform process, and training on the role of the Elenco, because I think the important thing for governors to understand is that the Elenco role is a statutory role. It's a crucial role in the school. It deserves the respect of that role, in the sense that schools need to give Elencos time to fulfill the role. And I think this is one of the issues that we have, is that there is a variation, can I say, across our local authority. I send out messages all the time to head teachers and Elencos that you do need to be given the time to undertake the role.
Can I just add to that? We provided governors with ALN training last academic year. I think it was last week we had the request for areas to cover for the summer term. So we will be adding ALN again into the training schedule for governors. Obviously, that's at a level that is, not necessarily as detailed in some ways, but we'd be keen to, if there's a need to, we're keen to address the demand really amongst governors to have a fuller understanding of the different levels of this area. Actually,
I presented to a group of regional governors in Merthyr, all the governing body that I can't remember the name of the former chair of governors at Cadraw, and there were only 3 governors turned up, which was really disappointing. So whether it hadn't been shared around, or maybe they hadn't information about it, and it was via Teams as well, so I thought there would be a lot of people there. So we can always do more governor training.
Thank you, Chair.
That's okay, thanks, Anna. I'm moving to Lawrence next.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned in the additional information that the task and finish groups, you have 4 task and finish groups. I'm just wondering when you're hoping for those work to be completed.
They're all meeting over the next 2 of the groups have met already, and there are 2 more groups to meet over the next fortnight, and we're hoping that work will be all rounded up by the end of this academic year.
So the output of that then will become obviously shared with everybody at that point, is it, by the next academic year?
Yeah, and that will inform our principles document that we'll publish as well.
There are some aspects that will take longer. So, for example, the task and finish group around LRBs. One of the big questions for us is secondary provision. Now, obviously, when you start thinking about additional LRB provision at secondary, you're looking at where is the space and who hasn't got new builds or building work going on, and the context there. So there are some elements that will be where there is a need to consider physical space, like the Welsh language LRB, for example. That won't be completed till September 24. So there will be elements that won't be resolved by the end of this academic year that will require further work going forward as well. But for example, the ones around criteria, process and policy, that will absolutely be completed. The one around individual development plans also. The one around finance, obviously there will be if there are implications that relate to structures and systems in place, then that has to be tied in with the financial year. So there are elements that may overlap into beyond the end of this academic year.
And we've also got representation from head teachers right across the borough from all the clusters, which is very important.
Yes. You unfortunately mentioned finance. So going forward then, how are you going to be able to finance some of these additional provisions that you're going to put in place?
At this point, we don't know whether there will be additional provision. We're in the process of looking at the data to see what the trends are. We know historically, it's interesting coming back to your point around School Action Plus, that when any local authority looks at allocating additional capacity to an LRB, or even a special school, some of the data that you look at is around the numbers of pupils on School Action Plus. You look at the trends coming through. If you look at the trends around School Action Plus, the numbers aren't going up, they're going down because there's been that piece of work around preparing for the ALN code change. We're currently looking at all our trend data to then build into the work that we're doing with the head teacher group around what the need is. As a local authority, Merthyr Tydfil has a higher than average, way higher, either the highest or the second highest number of places, LRB places per 1,000 people population in Wales. So we've already got a substantial amount of special provision. When you look at special schools as well, we're right up there. When you look actually at the level of funding, we're also comparatively high. So the question isn't necessarily, do we need more specialist provision? I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying that we need to explore that. But we also need to explore how we work with our schools to build that capacity so that we're seeing less pupils needing to be placed in LRBs and needing to be placed in special schools. The caveat for that is if there is a need for them to be in an LRB, a learning resource space, or in a special school, then absolutely we have to make sure that the provision is there and the space is there for those pupils. But that piece of work is ongoing. That's part and parcel of what we're doing in that task and finish group.
Yeah, just to finish off on that point, is the demand seems to be there, so on, and one would hope that we will meet the demand. The early intervention class is well reported, and obviously that's been proven to be very successful. And I know early intervention at a young age, we're talking about, you're not in that context. So therefore, that's an important area. So it's still a pilot, isn't it? So to what degree are we going to say that we are going to continue with that class or not?
At the moment, we're in our second year of the pilot, and I did attach the evaluation, the draft evaluation report, and you can see already that it's a really effective provision. It came about because we had to meet the need coming towards us, and there was a huge need for the youngest children coming into schools with, very low level social communication skills, something that I'd never ever seen before. In all the years I've worked in education, I've never seen this tsunami of need coming towards us, partly because of the impact of COVID, partly because there were so many children who just couldn't access their preschool entitlement, and sadly, partly because of environmental factors, societal factors, which I'm sure we could discuss for hours, as we often do in Elenco Forum. But these children are coming into schools with really quite complex social communication needs, which means it has all sorts of associated needs as well, things like toileting, which has become quite a high on the agenda of nursery classes. So all of these things, we knew that we had to do something. So we had these pupils we've got 16 pupils in the early intervention class. The majority of those pupils returned to had a link with their mainstream, they were registered, so they belong, you have to remember this, they belong to their mainstream school. And I think that's the big message we've got to get across with the early intervention class, that these children would have gone into mainstream classes anyway. They're mainstream, they belong to their mainstream schools, they belong to their community schools. And what we've got to remember is that transition from the early intervention class into the mainstream school is key to everything, to making it a success for them. They've had intervention, they've had lots of work, specialist work with developing attention, using the attention autism strategies, which some of you will know about, all sorts of PECS work as well, all of those things that develop children's social and communication skills. But they belong to their mainstream schools, because what we cannot do is say that these children have got a problem. We can't cope with them in mainstream. They would have gone into mainstream anyway. And that's the whole point of the class. And that's a bit of a culture shift, because we've already said they need intervention. We've already said they need specialist provision. What we've got to be careful of is that we don't say, so they don't belong in mainstream. They are mainstream pupils and they need to go into their mainstream schools. There are some children who we see have such complexity of need that they will possibly need specialist provision. Some may even show that they need Greenfield Special School. So we have seen that. But the important thing now is to get that relationship, the transition work with mainstream schools, understanding that these are their children. They're there for a short time in that class, and they're going to come to you with a level of support. So they go into mainstream with additional support, which means that they have some support from an LSA that's allocated to the school. But also we want to increase the expertise within our nursery settings to meet the needs of children with complex social communication needs. So it's a double whammy, isn't it? What we need to make sure is our schools are confident in being able to meet their needs. And all schools are nervous at the moment. They're finding it difficult. Some schools are meeting the need incredibly well. Some schools are nervous. They're finding it hard to meet the needs of these. And you probably, those of you who are governors have probably spoken about this in governors meetings, that we know the youngest children are really presenting as an issue. So we've got a social communication conference on March the 24th. It's a local authority conference. The buy-in is incredible. All our head teachers in primary schools are coming. The nursery teacher, our early years settings are coming. It's over in Orbit. There's about 150 people coming. And we've got the keynote speaker who's going to talk about developing attention. Got lots of workshops. And then we're trying to build confidence in our schools in how to meet the need. I could talk about this for ages, so I think I better shut up now.
So are we saying then that the intention is to stop the class?
To
stop the class?
No. I mean, we would think going forward that this class is going to be needed for quite a while.
Okay.
Currently, it's a pilot class, and the reason it's become a pilot is we had a class available within local authority. We managed to combine two complex needs classes. So we actually had an LRB that we've realigned by doing it as a pilot. So we'd need to go through the formal processes that local authorities have to go through to making that a substantive class in the authority.
Okay, the last question, because it's a hot topic. Do you agree there isn't a uniform understanding of what a school's universal provision is?
I think every school has an understanding of what their universal provision is. What we are doing at the moment is looking at this in the summer term with our Elencos. So our Elencos are going to be bringing to, and this is going to be via the Elenco Forum, because you're probably aware that that is the leading professional learning community at the moment for Elencos. Some schools would argue possibly that ELSA is not a universal provision. You know, I think most schools in Merthyr would argue that ELSA is a universal provision. Catch-up reading. If we've got something like Read Write Ink in our school and we do catch-up reading, that is universal provision, as far as the majority of schools in Merthyr would agree. But universal provision is for a school to decide itself to meet the needs of their learners. And some of our schools are incredibly challenged with additional learning needs. And some of our schools would see PECS and Makaton as part of their universal provision for our youngest children. And that's what they do every day. They've got their teachers trained. They're quite ready for their children to come in. They accept these children into their school and they class that as being part of what they offer. It's what do you offer to your children to meet their needs. So there needs to be an agreement as to what is generally agreed as universal provision across the authority. And that's what we're trying to do. But there also needs to be a school's own offer. They need to agree what their offer is.
That's the case. Would it not be very difficult? And if you've got a parent, talking to another parent from different areas, and that school provision it might be so different, it would cause some discord, put it that way.
I think parents do talk. I think parents talk a lot about, which school is very inclusive, which school is not inclusive, and we'd like to think all our schools are inclusive schools, wouldn't we? But parents do talk, and rightly they should too, because what you would want, and I know certainly from my point of view, because I've got a little one in my family who's got, he's deaf, so he has huge issues when he first went to school. And to me, it was very, very important that that school could meet his needs. And they did. And he went to a Welsh school too. So it makes, not in Merthyr, this is in Caerphilly, but to me, he hasn't got additional learning needs. He's got an impairment at the moment with his hearing. He's gone into a school that's, as part of its universal provision, offers things like play therapy and all the things that he needs to engage him in his learning. So I do think parents do talk. They talk about what's on offer in schools, how well their children are received in schools, and I think rightly so. So I don't think schools are not all equal, are they? They're not all the same. We would like them all to be the same, and we would like all schools to be inclusive, and we encourage that as a local authority.
But as a learning provision, as the authorities responsible for learning provision, then surely as a strategy, we should be ensuring as an authority that things are being equitable in provision.
In the sense of, in the LRBs, you mean?
Well, no, in sense of universal provision, for example, that all schools are equitable in that what that provision is.
Yeah, well, that would be the aim. Yeah.
Well, it should be the case, and it should be very clear what expectations are. But anyway, I thank you for that. Thank you.
That's
Thank you,
all right.
Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. Okay, and Elizabeth, finally to you.
Yeah, in terms of, I've got a few concerns about all of this, particularly in terms of the effect that it's having, that this changeover and the increased demand for services, the way that it's affecting staff, the way that it's affecting everyone in terms of mental health, and that is a real concern of mine. So that's one thing. Another thing is, and I'm sure we'll go on to talk about that in the next agenda item maybe, but the one thing that really concerns me is the Welsh language provision in terms of ALN. Do you know the unit down in Rhyd-y-Grig, has that been postponed at all or put off at all? It has September 24 always been the date for that opening?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. In actual fact, I got a feeling in the West it says 2025.
Right.
So actually 2024 is a year earlier than in the West, because I was looking at the West this afternoon, but it is 2024. It's always been 2024.
Right, okay. Well, it's brilliant news that that's going to be happening, because that's the first time that's going to been happening for Welsh schools in Merthyr. But I know that already there's a massive demand in Ysgol Rhyd-y-Grig and in Ysgol Santa Tydfil for that. I was talking to the head teacher in Santa Tydfil this morning. She was saying she has 15 children that need support like that, and talking about whether what will be the arrangements in terms of getting the children down to there, and will they still be connected to Santa Tydfil, or will they have to relocate in terms of schools? And I think there seems to be a lot of confusion and lack of information around this, in terms of the schools knowing what's going to be happening. If that's, do you want to answer that, or
yes, I think as you're aware, it is on the agenda item for the WEF in summer term. So actually that will, and Gavin will bring that to the WEF, whether it can, if you feel a scrutiny, you want to bring it back then, but actually this will go to WEF first for discussion.
Right,
And
okay.
actually then we can decide whether you want to bring it back to scrutiny as well. So it
Okay.
is on the agenda
That's
item. It is on the agenda for WEF in the summer term.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can I just answer about you was talking about time commitment and everything? I think you were concerned about that, weren't you, with the Elencos? Is that one of the things you wanted us to answer?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was just around some of the perhaps head and staffing concerns about timing and resource. Yeah.
I think this is a general concern right across the region about the amount of time Elencos have to commit to their role. And it is something that is being fed back to Welsh Government. I had a meeting with Liz Jones, who's one of the regional lead, and she is feeding that back to the Minister, that it's a very front-loaded system at the moment because we've got 3 years of implementation. We're in the second year of implementation, and it is a lot of work for Elencos. And she is pushing the Minister and trying to persuade him to extend for another year, possibly. Whether that will happen, I don't know.
Can I come in there a moment? Michelle and myself were actually with the Minister last Thursday and Friday. And this is actually, it hasn't come from Merthyr, so it hasn't come from this region, but it was a question that was raised by cabinet members in force at the meeting with the Minister, that we were told originally that this was going to be cost neutral, and whether it's the number of changes that schools are actually having to make at the moment. So it has been put quite vociferously, shall we say, by cabinet members to the Minister. Let's watch this space.
Can I just say that in terms of Welsh education as well, the transition from primary school to comprehensive school is quite a big issue, because some children are not able to travel on buses and things like that.
Liz,
I know
sorry, is this in relation to ALN now, or is this in relation to Welsh Medium?
it's to do with ALN.
All
If ALN, if they have ALN needs that affects them being able to go on transport, that again presents another barrier to the choice of Welsh education.
Okay, thank you. So that's another consideration. Obviously, that would be parental and school liaison then, and wider then with the officers if there is a barrier, because it shouldn't deter them to continuing their education through the medium of Welsh. Just to give you a little bit of support on that. Okay, colleagues, nobody else has indicated to speak, so therefore we'll bring this item to a close then. I think we have met what was specified in the recommendations and in both the items really, and deliberated them, discussed them and debated them as well. So and a number of actions to take forward for us as a scrutiny with the officers. So lastly then, with officers present, is just item number 5, which is the additional learning needs report from our task and finish group. This was led by our colleague Lawrence. Lawrence, if you just want to tell us who was involved in that task and finish group, and then obviously mindful of a brief summary with some of those recommendations linking into the previous report we've just had, would be really useful. Thank you. Sorry, Anna. Apologies, bear with me. No problem, thank you.
Yes, fine. Yes, as we say, we were asked to look at some aspects for this meeting today. So the membership of the task and finish group was myself, obviously, with Councillor Anna Williams-Price, Councillor Gareth Lewis and Paul Phillips. So the 4 of us took on the role, and we have obviously interviewed various people, as you can see in the report papers that we've submitted. The scope was basically to look at process and procedures, funding and operation, and how they work in the total ALN provision in the borough, and also if there's been an increased demand in the number of ALN referrals and to the LA, and identify the impact that this might have had on all concerned. So, as I say, we get to the recommendations. which were 4 recommendations. And which is in section 7 of the report, we've got to urgently review how the current additional learning needs provision can be improved to reduce the pressure on frontline staff and manage the anxiety of parents and carers. This should include all school senior leaders and perhaps be led by an independent person. The second recommendation, a time frame be put on the work being done, looking at the increase of specialist additional learning needs provision, the publication of a realistic plan, expressing exactly what the level of provision will be and the rationale used for the decisions made. 3, all processes and procedures be reviewed and updated so that clear roles, responsibilities, expectations and timeframes are included, etc. These processes should be signed off by all the professionals involved in them. And finally, schools should be encouraged and supported to look for opportunities to jointly employ ALN cores or share the cost toward other ALN resources that they might need. So I'm obviously open to any questions, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you, Lawrence, for that. I think we'll open it up to the floor if there are any questions. And then, as we do with our other scrutiny reports for officers, they ask those recommendations to be noted and then inevitably carried forward at some point where we could, you know, then deliberate those recommendations, because obviously you've only just recently had sight to those. I wouldn't expect you to be answering against those 4 recommendations today. That will be a matter to consider, and then for us to
Sorry, Chair, that's
bring
what I
forward.
was going to suggest, that we actually took the recommendations
Yes.
and brought and provided a response to this committee
Yeah.
Against those recommendations, if that was all right with Lawrence and the group that had done it.
Yeah, absolutely. As for my colleagues within the scrutiny, do you have any questions of the chair of that task and finish group? Do you have any questions of Lawrence at this point in time? If not, we'll take it forward that way. Jeff, I can see you edging to that microphone. Jeff, come in.
Just a comment, Chair, if I might. Yeah, I just think that my colleagues on this scrutiny committee have done a really good job on this. I'm sure you'll thank them at the end, but the truth of the matter is that these 4 people have got down into the depth of what this ALN provision is, and I think that they should be commended for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Elizabeth?
You know, on page 3, I saw that school senior leaders state that there has been a lack of appropriate funding and professional expertise available for this for a number of years. I'm really quite concerned after reading this report that people have got sufficient support, and that, you know, parents are getting the right information, and, you know, and that I really, I'm quite concerned that the whole situation is a bit of a mess, to be honest with you.
Okay, Elizabeth. Great, thank you. Okay, so inevitably, let's just paint a wider picture for you as well, because Sue has alluded to this, and I know that our cabinet member was in presence of the minister. I couldn't think of the word in then last week, and obviously, you know, for Jill, Gavin, the team as well. Like anything, it is something that is in that place of being embedded, impact being checked, etc., you know, as you've done with the task and finish group as well. So it is work in progress at the moment. I think inevitably, not just for you, but for parents, for teachers and for the officers, there are some concerns and alarm bells and things like that going off as we step through this process and as we work through the ALN bill. Inevitably, one of those biggest ones is a matter for Welsh Government and for ministerial consideration moving forward, as Sue has mentioned. And that is just really time and resource cost to schools in relation to this bill, you know. So as we step through it, I think for us as a scrutiny and together perhaps with colleagues from across the patch and certainly from within our shared network with colleagues in Bridgend, Cardiff and RCT specifically, you know, where we do work closely together, and the Vale, you know, we can share, you know, our own
evidence our own impact, etc. And then that will be a matter to be taken to the Minister and Welsh Government to deliberate as we see some of these actions and recommendations that have come to our table, if you like, and come to the officer's attention as we step through it. Because inevitably, it's not something that's ever going to be plain sailing, just because of the context and the you know, I guess, the children that we're working with and the teaching staff are working with, and then we have to be mindful then of the support that those teachers need as well. So I know that when we spoke to Central South previously, you know, there was a matter of additional support there. Jill has alluded to giving governors as much support as possible, you know, but obviously that needs to be forthcoming as well with governors in attendance. So it's a whole matter to be deliberated, and I think at some point in the future, I think we will inevitably come back to this, and then it will be a matter to discuss with Welsh Government as to how we then take it forward and what additional financial support is needed for LEAs, for the local authorities as well. Paul, before I conclude, because I haven't finished my conclusion, I can see you've got your mic on. Did you want to come in there?
Yes, if I may, just then to say that when we undertook that research, a lot was based upon perceptions. It was difficult then to gather up evidence, but I'm not surprised to see that the recommendations and the core elements then of our research then seem to coincide then with comments that were made then by the professional officials here. And I'm hoping that what they will accept is that much of it is then based upon hearsays, what we were told at that time. This is new. We understand that a lot of effort has gone into trying to help support then individuals then in the schools to be able then to fulfill those particular roles. And I don't think it's any surprise that at this stage in the development then of Elenco's that there is some misgivings. But I do hope that when you've had time then to look at it in detail, you will then conclude that probably we're teaching you what you already knew. But it was interesting research, and I'd like to thank Lawrence Venn for leading us so expertly and in his final report. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul. And so all that's left for me to do in relation to that is inevitably we will pick this up in our FWP for the next annual year of scrutiny. But it is to thank Paul and everybody that took part in the Task and Finish group. So Lawrence, Paul, yourself, Anna and Gareth as well. You know, it was really an excellent Task and Finish group. It has given some matter for deliberation and some recommendations. And as you said, they do actually integrate into the report that we'd had previously. So I don't think it's anything necessarily that we didn't know, but it certainly gives that key focus from you guys in that Task and Finish group then to support officers. So thank you ever so much as chair of the committee for undertaking that Task and Finish group. Thank you. And officers, on that note then, as we move into another agenda item, I'll thank you for your attendance today. Jill, Adele, Gavin, thank you ever so much. Sue and Michelle, as normal. Thanks ever so much, guys. Appreciate it. Anna, thank you ever so much. You'll see that a couple of items we'll pick up. You can have some input then as it comes out to you from officers. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, guys, agenda item number 6 I should be on, forward work programme. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna Lisa, teeth in, hang on 1 minute. It was that long journey back from Timbuktu, it was. Right, okay. Agenda item number 6 and 7 I'm going to combine together is what I was going to say. So what I want to do is I just want to reflect on the meeting and talking about our FWP moving forward. So the reason I want to say that is because a lot has come out basically from three reports, you know, but pretty hefty reports from when we're talking about attendances. A lot comes out of that because inevitably we are still talking about pandemic, aren't we? We're still talking about post-pandemic. We're talking about the impact of that. pre-pandemic, does anybody remember that? I'm not sure, but pre-pandemic, you know, we were always floating around in those bandings as far as local authority is concerned in relation to our attendance figures. You know, a lot of resource went into it in, I'm talking 17, 18, 18, 19, and then moving into 19, 20, where there were some real good improvements in attendance figures as well. But then guess what? You know, the pandemic hit us and we find ourselves in a position now where, as a local authority and as schools, we're having to re-engage with some of those families that we've always had to re-engage with, if you like, but also some of those children who are now presenting to ourselves where perhaps we hadn't thought we would have had problems before. We also have a very new cohort of children who are coming in with needs that we've never seen before, you know, finding very new classes when we've gone out and spoken to the schools recently about the new curriculum or about the ALN. We're also finding, because they like to share with us, and so they should, but we're also finding that, you know, children are presenting to us with lack of communication skills because they've only ever seen a mask for a couple of years and only adult communication, and also some of those social skills are lacking as well. And I'm talking about, you know, children presenting themselves to us who aren't potty trained, etc. And there's all these other supports needed, not just for the children and the teaching staff, but inevitably for parents and carers alike. So the reason I'm saying that and reflecting is because what came out of that are some reports that we need to follow up on. Jamie, Councillor Scriven, mentioned the importance of that, you know, the mental health impact that we're seeing, which is a tsunami in itself, really, post-COVID. And we also talked about the bespoke support for our CLAS, our children looked after, our ALN children, and obviously our disabled children as well, you know, as well as our mainstream children. So I think that what we need to do is pick up on that as a further report at an appropriate moment. And just mindful about today, just picking up on some of Elizabeth's comments then in regards to Welsh medium provision, not only the LRB and the effectiveness of that and how that pans out in the future, but also I'm mindful of a conversation we had, Liz, recently regarding the new school up in the Gurness. And I think as a scrutiny, we need to measure that again, measure the roll numbers and measure the impact and the transition then of those pupils into further Welsh medium education. And the other one that highlighted then for me as part of your discussions today, and can I thank you all again for some really robust questioning, it was excellent, is to follow up on the ALN toolkit. How it is going, how it's not going, how impactful it is, and then leading on to that then through Lawrence and the team, through their task and finish group, those recommendations, pick up on those at an appropriate juncture as well. Not forgetting, those of you who were able to make my pre-meet last week, we were talking about a suggestion from Jeff, one of our co-opted members, in relation to school balances and budgets. So just a reminder, I haven't forgotten about it. It's noted and we'll pick up that in the forward work plan. And last but not least, in our last meeting, we talked about a workshop, and that has gone into your diaries today. Hopefully you're able to attend. And just as a reminder, that is on Wednesday, the 3rd of May, and that's to discuss those recent ESTIN inspection reports as well. So for us then, as we talk about next year's forward plan, we can incorporate some of those actions and recommendations from those reports as we familiarise ourselves with them. So that's where I wanted to come in. Lawrence, Lawrence, you've gone. Did you want to come in there? Jeff? Lawrence, you sure you don't want to come in there now? Okay, Jeff, if you can come in there then, please. Yeah. Thank you.
If this is the appropriate juncture, Chair, on the forward work plan, we have today discussed, you know, those children that are disadvantaged and those children that are struggling and those mainstream children. But there's one group of children that we've forgotten, and that's the children that do very well and are our high achievers. And I know from experience that some high achievers are not being stretched as much as they might. So I wonder whether we could have a report on that, on how the high achievers are being given the opportunity to thrive, and what, if anything, can be done to improve the situation?
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so I'm minded to consider the more able and talented pupils, as we call them, commonly call them, so our teaching staff would recognise what we mean by that. So yeah, inevitably we can look at that, and that would also form part of what they're doing throughout the different year cohorts, and also those that are presenting themselves then in preparation for the GCSEs as well. So mindful of our 9, 10 and 11s, and where they transition from there. And then from me as well, I am interested, and I'll discuss this with you when we do meet to talk about the forward work plan, about the apprenticeship offer then as well for those, you know, in the careers service, the careers advice that we are giving our young people and pupils as they decide on their futures, being a tertiary model local authority as well, you know, post that year 11. So I think, yeah, we'll make a note of that, Jeff, and we can consider all of that, you know, in one bundle really of options for those most able and talented, but really transition for our pupils as well. Lawrence.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, what I was going to mention was perhaps another potential topic might be about the workload of teachers and perhaps expectations on them. Because I know obviously with the industrial action going on at the moment, part of the concerns are that particular aspect of it, isn't it? And the accountability of the level of work that's expected of them. So just a thought that that might be another potential area to look at.
Well, wipe my brow at that one, because that is a massive piece of work, but an important piece of work. A couple of things spring into my mind as we talk about that, Lawrence, is really twofold, I guess. It's one, looking at our teaching workforce in two sets then really within the local authority, primary and secondary, expectations of the role, especially with all these additional expectations that are placed within the schools as well. And then I think as well, we need to talk about our governing bodies at some point in relation to that, because as a governor and within your governing bodies, you should be looking at that as well into one of your committees, you know, so if there are real concerns, I'm talking about individual schools now, you know, this is why I was having a little wipe on my brow, because it's a big piece of work. But if we're talking about governors within an individual school as well, they should be monitoring that as far as, you know, their specific teaching workforce within that individual school. So that would be an interesting piece of work to do really with governors and some chairs of governors and vice chairs of governors as well, or members of those particular teaching committees. So noted, Lawrence, it is really important, especially with, you know, concerns that we're hearing about in media, you know, about how our teachers are really struggling, you know, as well. So yeah, let's make a note of that, and we can take those conversations forward as we meet to plan the next calendar year. I'm thinking the next 2 or 3 years actually now as well. So, okay, Paul.
On the topic of governing bodies, I think we also then need to have a look at the effectiveness then of governing bodies and the constituent parts, because I know from experience that they are varied in size, components, and how they operate.
Yeah, I think what we could do, Paul, is I'm just being, I'm trying to think whether it was in my days as previous chair of this committee or whether it was as cabinet member, but there was a report on governing bodies, because inevitably it's a statutory function, and they are answerable to the school as such, you know, and then us as an LEA, you know. So there was a report. I'll see if I can dig out that previous report, and maybe we could follow up on that now, you know, the number of years later really, about how impactful a governing body is, their roles and responsibilities, and then taking that forward. Jeff, did you want to come in there? Sorry.
I thought the report was about 3 years ago. I've got a funny feeling that you had the position of what Michelle had. I think.
No,
but the best person to ask is sitting next to you.
Yeah, appreciate the last Jane, because my brain, bless it, you know, I want to say the M word for women these days, but you know, I'm sure it's something we're all free to share these days, aren't we? It's another topic of conversation, isn't it? But yeah, apologies, Jeff. I
tried to remember in what position I was at the time, but I remembered that there was a report, and I think it would be useful for us to pick that up and follow that up then, Paul, in relation to, you know, some of the points you've just made, really. So another one, I think we filled next year's calendar already, but I think very useful to do so. So we'll do that. Thank you, Jeff, for reminding me. This is why I need you here, see, a little shoulder to lean on. Okay, I can't see any other hands up or anything, guys, so I shall move on swiftly. Scrutiny referrals, I have none. Any other business deemed urgent by the chair? Nice cup of tea or coffee I need now after that one. I think that's the only urgent issue. Jamie, I can't see his hand up, keeping a mindful eye on Jamie as well. But no, just to thank you all for your attendance today, for your ongoing work in relation to this scrutiny committee, and I shall see you all very soon. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
And apologies if we are still recording. Councillor Gareth Lewis sent his apologies. He was trying to get online, but he was also in motion at the time travelling. So thank you.